We are live with David Culen. David, you've owned multiple real estate offices, coached tons of realtors, interviewed, I don't know, hundreds of top producers. How many top producers have you interviewed in your career?
Yeah, that's probably a fair assessment. It's in the hundreds.
I love it.
I never counted. I just did it because I wanted to add value to the listeners, and selfishly, it was a great way for me to learn a ton.
So overall, so what we're doing today, this is Ask Me Anything. So anyone watching this, if you got questions for David, so literally the information he has pulled from a lot of these realtors, he was on Agent Power Huddle. I don't know, last month sometime. We'll get the recording out. We'll drop a link in the comments to this. But that's why I wanted to do this, was I wanted more than 30 minutes to go deeper and ask you questions. So if people watching, I've got Facebook open on my monitor over here. I've got everything over here. So if you guys drop questions here, if you want to jump on the live with us, let me know. I can shoot you an invite. We can have people jump in here and ask you questions directly. But from all those hundreds of interviews, I'll just ask the first question to get us started, man. But what jumps out at you? Like, is there one interview that you did that you're like, oh man, this one, like, is there any one specifically that you remember thinking, this is a really good one?
Well, I think it was sort of the, first of all, I would say most of them were very good only because the people that I was talking to were so good, and they were willing to be humble. They were very transparent. They weren't afraid to share all of the things that they had failed. And so whenever you're in that kind of a conversation and it's authentic, and someone came from nothing to relatively successful or super successful, I think how you define that varies. Yep. You're going to have great content. And what I think about when you ask that question is what are the common denominators of each of those people's journey? Okay. And I think resilience comes to mind, and the ability to self-educate comes to mind, and the word accountable comes to mind. And I'll give you some examples of both sides. If we're all in the same brokerage together, and somebody's selling 200 homes a year and someone else is selling 0, what's the challenge there? What's the issue there? And I think if I had to summarize that, I would have to use a victim versus accountable description, and one who's doing nothing with the same opportunity with someone who's doing 200 is, one is poor me and I can't and I don't know how and no one told me what to do, and the other one is I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to take massive action. I'm going to fail my way forward, and every time I fall, I'm going to scrape myself back up and hit it again.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, guys, if you're just joining us, this is an Ask Me Anything with David Culen, which we build you as a real estate coach. Do you define yourself? I mean, I don't know. I know you've never run like a paid coaching program, but do you define yourself as a real estate coach?
I mean, when you mentioned that in the advertisement, I was thinking, no, I don't really identify myself with that, and it's probably because some time ago, I figured out what I like to do, and what I like to do is to build and create. And so a small portion of that building, of course, then would be coaching, because, you know, we're building the company based on recruiting realtors, and then we're keeping those realtors because we're able to coach, consult, and train them and get them to go from wherever they were to where they want to be. And that I believe is the secret sauce to building the brokerage, because if you think about what that does, it does a couple things. One, if I was sitting next to you in an office at a former company and you moved and all of a sudden you went from 10 million to 200 million, that's a real story. What are you now thinking? You know, you're sort of thinking, wow, I'm second guessing myself. You have a FOMO, and maybe you want to move over to that entity and get a little piece of that action. That's part of it. And I think it's very rewarding and very fulfilling to do that. But inside the company, when I mentioned build and create, that creates a tremendous amount of energy. when things are stagnant, I believe that you're slowly and then all of the suddenly going out of business.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. And I see, by the way, Amy Izzo is watching this. Like a few other people over here who are watching. Ivan Choi, if you guys have questions and you want to ask live, right, type them in the chat box, or I can actually give you Zach, and we can send you a direct invite link. You want to jump on here and ask David a question? That's the whole fun of this. I said, David, why do you want to do this? He's like, I'm excited to hear people questions ask me.
Without knowing them in advance, I think it creates it's interesting.
It does. It's a fun dynamic. All right.
So if someone asks me one that I don't know, I'm just going to rip the cord out and tell you I got disconnected.
So in terms of, I'm just going to keep asking questions while I'm waiting for people to chime in here and ask some other ones. But when you're talking about growth, someone going from, 2 million to 200 million, and not that that's everyone's goal in real estate, but I feel like most people's goal is to continue to grow at some level. Is it strictly just the mindset piece, or what else is there that contributes mainly to that growth that you've witnessed from agents?
Well, I think the mindset and the goal, or thinking with the end in mind to grow something that big, are all necessary to do so. And I think people do it for different reasons. And I think some people think they want to do it until they get into it. And that's why I use the word resilience. So if it really truly is absolutely what the person wants to do, then I think that they'll find the resilience to do it. And if they sort of decided to do it because they read about it in a book or saw someone else doing it, and became very challenged going through that process with certain aspects of what it takes to get there, oftentimes they quit. And I'll ask myself that same question you're asking. I sometimes wonder, is when they quit, and the language they're now using, is it because of fear? Is it because they failed? Has it become too difficult? Or do they truly do not want to do it? And I often never know the answer to that. And I guess I think about it because it's sort of like when you read a cover of a book and it says, anyone can do this, but not everybody will, and I don't know what you think about that, but I think it's oftentimes a matter of perseverance. In other words, let's look at the money factor as an example. So let's say the person had the opportunity to go from $50,000 a year in earnings to $500,000 a year in earnings.
Okay.
And along the way, they say, well, yeah, we just decided we don't want to do that, or I don't want to do that anymore. I also think about this. I say, well, if somebody were to drop off a stack of $500,000 every year on January 1st to your front door at your home, would you accept it or would you turn it away?
I'd accept it.
Yeah, and most people would accept it, right? So it leads me to believe that they just need a little bit more of a push, maybe some consulting, maybe some therapy, whatever it might be, to get to that end goal. Because I think you have to earn more than we anticipate to satisfy a few basic things. One is basic necessities and basic needs. Two is you have to earn enough to pay your taxes and do the former, and then what you have to earn even more to do the first two, and then invest so that you're not forced by lack of financial stability to do open houses when you're in your 70s.
Is that a pattern you see? I mean, how many agents are currently in the brokerage you have right now? You have a pretty large brokerage, right?
Well, our brand is Pacific Estates. It's 3 locations, and it's in the 800 range.
I mean, that's pretty big in the world of what you've built. So is that a pattern that you see in the agents that you have in your brand?
What you mean? What I just described?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm saying that based on a global observation over almost 20 years. So not specific to our brand.
More to human beings.
Yeah, and I think it's human beings, and I often say, let's not forget we're in the human business. I mean, that's really what it is. It wouldn't matter if we were in real estate or we were in my old industry, which was personal training and nutrition, or any of my other friends that are lawyers or what have you. It's all human based.
Okay, so now something that was interesting that just came up. And by the way, I'm tagging people on my other monitor so we can get some people in here asking some questions. So you came with a background in nutrition, personal training.
Yes.
What did you do back then?
I worked with clients on getting them into great shape for different reasons. Some of them were celebrities, some of them were pro athletes, and some of them had enough disposable income and a reason to want to look better and feel better.
Interesting. So you were a personal trainer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how did you transition from that to real estate?
Well, the same way I got into personal training and nutrition is you read a lot, you study, and you have a goal to get in there. And I did the same thing with real estate. It was probably easier to become a realtor than becoming a personal trainer and a nutritionist. I did it because in hindsight, I think I lost the passion of being in that business only because I didn't have the skills and tools to figure out how to leverage and expand it so that I could just focus on the things I love to do and not the other things. I didn't learn that piece until after I came to KW in 2000. I started looking at the end of 2006 and came on board in 2007. And I did that to learn those skills. And then once you learn those skills, of course, they're portable and you can take them anywhere.
Right. And then that's part of the rules of engagement for real estate. That's what you talked about last time you were on Agent Power Huddle. And that's what I love about the way you look at the world is once you develop that stack of rules, they really do port over to anything.
Yeah. And it's a combination of looking at the complexity of it and then being able to simplify it and then keep going back and forth between the two, because you certainly want to learn. You want to know what we should be doing now. We want to figure out where the future is going. You want to know the details of that. But when I'm taking action on getting there, I think about what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that I can do and only do that. And by the way, that is completely outside of my natural behavior. My natural behavior is to pick up the phone and call Jesse and drive around in the car and be in constant motion. As opposed to doing the same thing over and over and again. And so somebody once told me, you need to go small to grow big. And at first, you hear things like that and it doesn't mean much until you do it a little bit, even if it's by accident. And then you see a result and you're like, oh, wow, that was interesting. How did I get that result? And how can I duplicate that over and over and over again?
I love it.
Ultimately, your schedule becomes extremely basic.
Well, we've got our first question from a viewer, from Amy Izzo, and Amy says, "What are the top 3 things?" And this is a good one for you being in LA because you got some wide range of price points by you, right? Mm-hmm. What are the top 3 things an agent must do to move up your price point?
Great question, Amy. Let me see if I can. Here's this. There's a few things that come into my mind, and I thought a question like this might come up. And I think of someone who was in my office formerly, Kevin Sturdivant, and he had an experience where he was in the business and he was selling things in the $400,000 price point, and ultimately ended up going out of the business and then took about a 2-year break and came back in. And he came back in, and I think in year 1 made $275,000 in GCI, and the next year made 1.1 million, and now is probably closer to the $4 million range. I believe he did $111 million in sales this year, and his team did $294 million. And the difference between going in the business in the first run at it versus the second is he did up the price point, and he did it because he realized that he wasn't passionate about the product he was selling at the $400,000 price point. And he realized what he really loved was modern architecture, lots of glass and steel, mid-century stuff, liked it in great neighborhoods and great locations, which is where he wanted to spend his time. and he did it by simply picking up the telephone and targeting those neighborhoods using Mojo and fairy scripts. So what his answer to that question would be, which I liked, is he would be like, how to up your price point in 30 seconds. And what he means by that is just simply be where the people that have that kind of income and own those properties are, and stay in there. And then over time that evolves, right? After he earned a certain amount of money, he then moved into one of those neighborhoods. Now he's in the local area where the people that own those types of properties are, and he's having lots and lots of conversations with people at the income level that can afford those properties.
I love it.
And then I would say this is the only thing stopping someone from doing it would be fear, because the data is there.
Yeah, I love it. All right, now we're getting some questions coming in. I don't know if you can see these on your screen also. This is fun. All right, cool. So you ready? This is the cool stuff. So Jeff Lyons is asking, what is the best way to turn one listing into more listings?
Perfect. There's probably a couple answers to that question. So I would probably have to know where the first listing came from to better answer that question. So if that listing came from, in my previous comments, from a Mojo dialer calling expireds, which was Kevin's case, then he would simply continue to do that in that same neighborhood, doing what's called circle prospecting. And then he would also then go out to that neighborhood and knock on those doors. And of course, doing traditional methods that realtors do, open houses. And I think the reason why people are successful or not is really only two things. Either they choose not to do those items that I just listed, or they're not really that polished, they're uncomfortable, and they're a little bit awkward when they're out there engaging with those people, and they haven't yet evolved into, maybe a certain level of charisma to attract those future deals. And that's why I think people say things like, don't get married to the result, get married to the process. Because if you just keep doing something over and over again, even if you suck at it at first, ultimately you'll become good at it. And when people become good at something, they tend to also say, I like that. When we suck at it, what do we say? That doesn't work. Oh, that's not me. And so on and so forth.
Totally. I love it. Let's see here. I got a couple more questions. This is fun. I like this now. We've got, and some of these names, by the way, if you're posting questions and your name is not popping up on here, it's because you have to allow StreamYard to post your name. But this is from Shelly, asked this question. Shelly O'Neill, she said, what are the best ways to ask for referrals without sounding salesy?
That's a good question too. And I wish I could remember what Tristan says about that. Tristan has he's a great script and dialogue guy. But I think the mindset of it must come from adding value and just being curious. And I would think about it from a perspective of this, and maybe this helps answer the question, and maybe it doesn't. But I've worked with agents over the years, as Jesse pointed out, and sometimes you'll know that person and you'll engage with that person, and then you'll see them sort of put on a business hat and then go out and do things. And I've often seen people lose their authenticity, and they're no longer who they are naturally. And they're sort of now becoming someone else because it's quote unquote business. And I always would ask them, well, who told you to do that? And it's much like building a tribe on social media. Is I think it starts with authenticity. And if you're coming from contribution and adding value, then people are going to want to refer you. And I think maybe why the question is being asked is should at the end of every conversation say, who do you know that may want to buy, sell, or invest in real estate? And I think the answer to that question would be, I think it depends. And I think it depends on the relationship and where you are in that relationship. And I think that if you have enough people in your sphere, then you'll get enough referrals, and you can sort of figure out intuitively when to ask that and when not to ask that. Therefore, you're no longer cheesy.
Which is the whole part of it is being authentic, right? That's the way to. Yeah.
And by the way, and sort of reverse engineer it. You can sort of answer the question yourself. And I know someone named Barbara Betts, phenomenal at generating referrals. You know, she's just a master of what Brian Buffini teaches. And one time when we met years ago, she invited me to an event that she was putting on. And what she did is it was a group of people that referred her in her SOI that also had businesses that they owned. And what she did for them was she taught them the by referral business process so that they could elevate their own game. Now, there happened to be a lawyer in the room, and the lawyer, when the subject matter came up, literally stood up and was in tears, thanking Barbara to no end that going through law school, she never learned how to generate business, never understood marketing, and didn't realize the value and the low cost benefit of doing business by referral. And because Barbara taught her that, her law practice went through the roof, and she's standing there in front of a group of people she may or may not know, in tears, telling that story. So is it cheesy for Barbara to have done that? What do you think that lawyer thinks?
Wow. That's incredible. I mean,
yeah, it makes me get little goosebumps telling the story, because that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And the thing is, as we hear that, and now I've just said it, and however many people now hear it for the first time, the reason why I taught the rules of engagement, which you mentioned earlier, is why doesn't everybody go out and do it? And the rules of engagement series was to reinforce the people's mindset so that they would take action. And quite frankly, a lot of the content, for anybody that wants to know, was right out of Jack Canfield's book, The Success Principles. And the reason I did it to begin with was, again, to reinforce my own mindset. And so I said, you know what, I'm just going to do this 30 minutes to an hour every Tuesday at 8:30 in the morning. Let's get people right after kids drop off. They can come right to the office, get an early start. So I thought, well, that's a good thing a leader should do. Get people in early, start their day early. Now let's get their heads screwed on right, including my own. And because it's such a lengthy book, I think it's 67 chapters, it took me 42 weeks to get through the book. Now, what would happen if I did it again and again and again? The teacher learns the most, and that's something that I intend on doing again this year in 2021.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, I'd only blocked off 30 minutes for this guy. I didn't realize we'd start having this many questions. Now we know for next time, David, it takes a good 15 minutes to get the questions rolling in, and now we have all these questions coming in. So, I mean, I don't know how much time you have blocked off, but can you see the questions on your side? I don't think you can see them anyway, can you?
Questions on the side, but if you want to do one or two more, we can do that. If you have time, I'll make time.
Yeah, let's do one more. Let's just do one more. I want to pick one good one here. How can agents? I'll give you a choice.
I can't see these questions, and Jesse is not my paid screener.
I know. So here we go. So we got two choices here. We got one from Matthew Soto, which is asking, with most markets showing low inventory, what can an agent do to get more listings? And this one will kind of tie into it, which is also, I think Jeff was asking this one, which is how can agents shift from buyers to sellers? So those kind of tie together, right? Would you say what's obviously it could be a very large strategy, but in a one or two bullet points, how would someone go about getting more listings in a low inventory market?
Okay, well, I'm gonna give that a very easy answer. It's just volume. You know, it's like everything else in the world. It's a great question, because what the question really says is let's focus on what we can control. We can't control the fact that there's low inventory. There's not a whole lot you and I can do that on a global level. But what we can do is we can control the number of contacts that we make. And it's that simple. There's no rocket science there. Now, the other question that said, how do I transition from buyers to sellers is again, I'm gonna look at the complexity of it and then figure out how to make that really simple. Well, the real simple answer is if you've worked with a buyer, you can work with a seller. You're going to take the same approach. You're trying to do what's called a needs analysis or a gap analysis. You're going to go in, you're going to ask great, intelligent, relevant questions about what this person wants to accomplish. If this transaction goes perfectly, what's your intended result? How does that look? And you start asking them questions to figure out where they are now, where they want to go, what is the gap, and then if you're have enough value and can close that gap for this person, that's great. And maybe they want some historical evidence or some social proof or some testimonials. I think you'll build that over time. Worst case scenario, you take a very proven, sophisticated professional with you, and maybe you share the first two if you're nervous or you feel like there's a risk factor there that you might walk away without the listing. And then the other thing I would add to that is what's the reason to go from working with buyers to sellers? And that's always been very simple to understand once I read a few things, which was the data behind it. And the data behind it is, first and foremost, we're in a lead generation business. And a lead generation business, when you compare the difference between working with a buyer and a seller, let's say I work with Jesse and he's my buyer, and we spend a lot of time and effort in the car driving around. He looks at properties, I look at properties. Eventually we find one, we write an offer, we're lucky enough to get it accepted. We go through the contract to close process. I hand the keys over to Jesse and he's happy. How many people really know about that process? It's just really like Jesse and I, for the most part. Now, if you reverse that and I go out and I take a listing, what's the first thing I'm going to do with that listing? Is I'm going to probably put a sign in the yard. I'm going to put it into the internet. It's going to get syndicated. I'm going to do open houses. I'm going to tell all my friends on Facebook. The MLS is going to do its work. The agents in the local community. There's a lot of big noise. It becomes now a marketing platform to generate additional leads from. And then you look at the time and effort spent on those activities, and driving around with Jesse in the car is very time consuming. I can only have about 6 to 8 Jessies versus about 25 sellers at any given time. And from the marketing efforts as a result of taking a listing, I'm going to have all the buyers I want anyway. And you'll always see statistics over and over and over again historically in this industry that if I focus on listings, I'm going to ultimately end up having a 50-50 business anyway, where 50% of my business is listings from a focus on that effort, and the other 50% is buy-side deals that came as a result of the former.
I love it. I love the focus on shifting into what you can control. Most of all, that's what I took out of this. So good. All right, well, dude, obviously we could do this for a long time. Thank you for being here, David. This is fun.
You're awesome.
Dude, appreciate it. Everybody enjoy your day. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Produced by the Agent Collective Media Network.